Okay, see if I can find the words to describe sort of what was on my mind earlier this morning. So I was thinking about, some of the ways in which, we encounter dark moments in our lives. And, when we're going through them, they feel very real. And, it's like, often we feel very like sort of our back up against the wall, up against the ropes. And, kind of like, how will I ever feel good again? And we feel this way for a while. And, when we're in this state, we sort of forget like everything positive, everything good that has happened and what we felt like before, this, set of feelings came along. These feelings were triggered somehow for whatever reason, we find ourselves, so for whatever reason, we find ourselves in these, I like to call them ego states. You could call it a mood, but, really it's almost like an identity, takes hold of us. It's not just like a mood, it sort of implies that there's like some continuous, part that is affecting, us as a person, and somehow, there's an integration between, the self, the greater self, and this mood. But I think often, as much as we may think of these moments of despair as like moods, they're really almost like an identity shift. Like, because it's almost like we've completely forgotten who we were when we were happy, or who we were when some other circumstance was present in our life. And, sometimes there's like dilemmas, It's often like, these dilemmas that trigger these kinds of ego states. And, sometimes, these dilemmas can happen without us really like, recognizing that we're in a dilemma again, like that something has triggered a feeling of a dilemma, because it's sort of like a dilemma that never really got solved. So it's just like always in the background. And so like every once in a while we're reminded of this dilemma, and it's like sort of like we feel ourselves slinking down and slowly moving toward some kind of sense that we've been abandoned by the world and the people that love us, and that we're not recognized, that we don't have a voice, that our problems don't matter to anyone but ourselves, and our problems are too big for us to really like solve it on our own. And so we feel sort of voiceless and trapped. And so, this is one kind of ego state. And, then something happens, something shifts, And now we're, sort of back to more like our baseline of happiness. We're not like we're not in the despair, but now we're more in our like normal operating function, which may have some depression and despair in it, but it's not like, the sort of feeling of crisis that has emerged. And in this ego state, all of a sudden, it's almost like we've forgotten, like the same way we forget when we're at our lowest or at our lower ego states. When we enter back into our higher ego states, we sort of forget about the lower version, ego states, in terms of the feelings of suffering being greater. So, and then it's like our mind does like this trick of making us almost like forget that ever happened, or that this is like a reoccurring dilemma that we find ourselves in. And then we go on being happy, and we, resume our habits. Some of them, might be unhealthy habits, but we're sort of okay again. We can sort of like swallow the Matrix steak, and somehow it tastes like steak again for a little while, and then we just, we kind of forget this other part of ourselves that came up, but then it went away again, and we're just kind of grateful it's gone, so we don't really like want to think about it. We don't want to like invoke that place. And so it's almost like we sort of like acknowledge perhaps that we were in a depressed place, but now we're back to being ourselves. But the truth is, that this lower state that we were in, that was us as well. And somehow there's like a lack of communication going on here between these two different ego states, because like when you're in the one, you kind of forget that the other existed. And when you're in the other, you forget, that the other one existed. So there's like a lack of integration here. And, sometimes, and so now this kind of like, I want to like lead into like how this relates to, what people commonly refer to as rock bottom, because, okay, so rock bottom is like, it means different things to different people, but fundamentally what it means to me, and some of the, rock bottoms, I've, hit multiple rock bottoms in my life where emotionally I just felt totally, it's not just like an ego state, shift where I felt depressed and I felt like I was up against the ropes, but where I just sort of like, my will to live was really challenged, and there was like nowhere really comfort. There was no comfort to turn to in my mind. There was no, sort of warm, cozy thought or an idea of anyone in this world that could really help me with what I was going through. And, it really did feel, like some kind of abandonment from essentially, everyone in this world. And, that's like, I don't know how to necessarily describe that feeling, but it's not pleasant to be sort of like, it sort of kind of feels like you're on the moon and you're looking down on the earth and you see, yes, you're aware that other people exist, but it just feels like they might as well not exist. And, even in the people in your life, you can communicate some of the things and they can help you a little bit, but really, they don't, at the end of the day, they don't really care enough to really put their feelers out there, put their senses out there to really, hear you and to really feel what it is that you're going through. And so you have to go through it on your own. And then when you're left in this place, it's like, why am I don't fucking want to do this. I don't want to do this alone. I don't care enough about me to solve this problem. You know, I'm not here because I chose to be. I'm here because, you know, my parents decided, you know, to make a baby one day. And now I'm here dealing with this shit and no one is helping me, you know? And yeah, it's just like, so yeah, this is sort of like the ego state that I found myself in. This sort of uphill battle, you know? And then, you know, when I've hit, you know, the lowest state, you know, the lowest version of this, you know, that's what I would call rock bottom. But then, you know, when that happens, something shifts, because you can no longer really forget, you know, the dire reality that you're in, because like some part of this dissatisfaction just won't leave you. You know, it sort of sticks with you. And even when you shift back into, you know, your old habits and, you know, a higher sort of happier state of function, more, you know, high functioning state, you can't really like unsee what you've seen when you hit rock bottom, because when you hit rock bottom, the truth is, what that really means is that now you're seeing that there is like a problem that has not been dealt with. And it, you know, it's not just a matter of, oh, it was a mood that came and it went. It's like, oh, all these bad moods that I've had, they were all part of this. And before I was able to sort of like, when I shifted back, I was able to like ignore all that stuff and go back to being my, you know, happier self. But now that I've hit rock bottom, I can't really comfortably go back and continue to live my life the way that I've lived it. Because, you know, whatever I do from this point forward, none of it will be satisfying if I don't somehow take responsibility for my life and start charting a different course. Because there's decisions that I've made in this life that I'm not happy with. And there's habits that I've had that no longer feed me. And so what I'm left with is just a great pit of despair, because it's like I have to let go. You know, it's like the world has abandoned me. I have found myself, you know, I've escaped into these habits that comforted me for a long time. But now not even my comforts are comforting anymore. And so fundamentally, it's like experiencing a sort of death, because now you're really in the desert, because you don't have, you know, anyone that can help you, and you can't even really help yourself. And, you know, the reality is there may be no way out for you. But then you really have to look, because if you're going to get yourself out of this, you know, you have to make some kind of fucking choice. And it might be a hard choice, and it may be a difficult, and it might make you uncomfortable, and it might, you know, ruin some relationships, and it might mean that, you know, you might have to do things that are going to make waves, and, you know, you might lose some respect from people who, you know, you've masked yourself so that you could get along with them. But fundamentally, when you come down to it, then you realize, okay, I actually have to fight for my survival, because I can't, I have to like put myself first. I have to, like, if I want to be a happier, healthier person, I have to sort of let go of everything that is false. Every like belief in me that is false about myself and what will make me happy, because none of these habits, none of these band-aids that I put on it make me happy. And so, then you really begin to realize that you have a freedom that you didn't have before, because you're able to let go of everything that really doesn't matter, because once you're like, you realize you're kind of like really on your own, and the only thing that can get you out of it is your choices, then you have the freedom to really look at what choices are there that are actually available to you. Are there things that you overlooked because they were uncomfortable and scary? Are there things that you haven't done because you were afraid to? And so, the reason, so I want to link this all together, because my main point is here, we sort of shift between ego states, and we don't really, sometimes we forget how depressed we were, and then we just like go back to our other function, and then we just kind of like sweep that under the rug. And it's almost like we wipe that part of away from our conscious memory, because it's like we haven't fully yet seen, because our comforts still are comforting enough so that, we want to sort of still like continue going on, ignoring the bigger problem in our life. And so, yeah, it's like, it's interesting how the mind shifts back and forth, but then sort of like, the unfortunate reality is sometimes we can reach a point where we can no longer like shift back and forth so comfortably, because our eyes are peeled, our eyelids are peeled back, and now we kind of have to look at it, because it's just too, the world, life just becomes too meaningless if we don't somehow find something that makes us want to live, in this world, and, we're not really good to anyone if we don't figure out what it is that makes us happy first. And, anyone who doesn't, who wants to like stand in the way of that, those people, we have to sort of leave behind, even no matter how much we love them, and how much they might give to us in various senses. If the reality is that the net effect of their influence on you is that you want to die, then they're no good for you. Then they might as well be a poison pill. And it's not like, it's not really anything personal, and it's not anything about them. It's more about us and what we need to do, and we sometimes have to really make some hard choices that are really uncomfortable, and that make us more awake in a sense. You could call it disillusioned, but if you can sort of go past the disillusion part and go back to the part of yourself, that wants to live and is open to making making things, sometimes small differences and sometimes radical, changes, then, we can really begin to approach life from a more conscious point of view. And then when we shift ego states, we do it more consciously, and we remember, the different moods that we were in and the different thoughts that we've had, because we begin to be able to be an observer, because there's some feelings that are really uncomfortable sometimes that won't go away. And so they need us to constantly be aware and awake and watch them, watch them the way a yogi practices a mantra or pays attention to his breath. Sometimes we have to be very vigilant of some very uncomfortable feelings that we overlook when we shift ego states. But by paying attention to them, we become more aware, and we don't go into a state of somnambulism again, sleepwalking state, where we're able to step aside so easily from the reality of this uncomfortable feeling inside of us. Because the uncomfortable feeling, we often call it depression, and we are eager to have a doctor invent some kind of pill to make it go away. But a lot of times this uncomfortable feeling in you that is speaking to you, that is you. And when you learn to coexist with a more real part of yourself, it will begin to start informing you on what to really do with yourself, who to really listen to, what values are really real values and not just some fake, shit that some organization or religion came up with. What are the real values that make you want to be here on earth, that make you want to be a good person and an enjoyable person to be around. What are these things that are going to really aid your survival? And sometimes, the answers that we're looking for are in the really uncomfortable, tight little nugget in your chest that, we try to dull ourselves to with, medications and drugs and escapism and, whatever else. So, sometimes happiness is found in, the uncomfortable places that we don't want to look. And so, just think it's interesting how, the mind shifts between ego states. We forget that one existed when we're in the other, but then when we hit rock bottom, all of a sudden we have to sort of begin to be more of a conscious witness to our lives, and we have to sort of look at ourselves in a very unjudgmental way to really get to know who it is that we're really, living with inside of ourselves. Anyhow, I'll leave it here. Have a good one.